He tried every treatment, but no protocol could heal what hurt the most: the loneliness. His body was crying out for help, but his soul had long since given up. It was a wounded child who saw beyond the diagnosis and named the void. And when love walked through the door, what was an end became a new beginning. If this beautiful story of resilience and love interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which silence of the doctor's office seemed to suck all the air out of the room. Robert Thorne, 50 years old, remained seated in the leather chair while the oncologist leafed through his exams for the third time, as if searching for a different answer between the same pages he had already read. The sound of the paper turning echoed like a countdown. "Dr. Miller, have you finished the analysis?" Robert's voice came out harsher than he intended, a reflection of the 3 months of anxiety that had been corroding his sleep. The doctor took off his glasses and cleaned them slowly, a gesture Robert had learned to interpret as a preliminary to bad news. "Robert, we've discussed all the available possibilities. The experimental treatment in Houston didn't show the expected results. The immunotherapy protocol in London also showed no significant response." Robert felt his stomach tighten. He had spent the last 2 years traveling the world, consulting the best specialists, undergoing procedures that cost fortunes and promised miracles. Clinics in Boston, hospitals in Germany, research centers in Japan. Each trip fueled a hope that shattered in the next office. And now? Is there any protocol we haven't tried yet? Robert leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly enough to turn his knuckles white. Dr. Miller sighed, choosing his words with the care of someone who had delivered similar sentences many times. "Robert, you fought like a warrior. We explored every scientific alternative available. The tumor is not responding to any intervention, and the metastases—" He paused. "What we can do now is ensure quality of life and comfort." The words floated in the air like a thick mist. Robert heard them, but his brain refused to process the full meaning. 50 years spent building an empire from scratch, overcoming economic crises, defeating competitors, winning every corporate battle he faced, and now he stood before an enemy he couldn't buy, intimidate, or negotiate with. "How long?" The question came out in a whisper. "With proper palliative care, maybe 6 months. It could be more, it could be less. The body is unpredictable at this stage." Robert stood up abruptly, the chair creaking behind him. 6 months, half a year, 180 days, to wrap up an entire life. He thanked the doctor with a mechanical nod and left the office without looking back. The elevator descended in silence to the ground floor of the Presbyterian Hospital. When the doors opened, Robert was hit by the typical movement of New York City, people rushing, talking on their phones, living their lives with the haste of those who have projects for the coming decades. He felt like a ghost observing the living. His driver was waiting for him beside the black Mercedes, but Robert made a gesture waving him off. He needed to walk, to feel the asphalt under his feet, perhaps to find some meaning in the movement of the city that had always been his arena of conquest. He began walking through the streets of the Upper West Side, where his penthouse was located. Glass buildings reflected a gray sky typical of a New York winter. He passed sophisticated restaurants where he used to close million-dollar deals, designer stores he frequented without looking at prices, exclusive gyms where he kept his physique in shape to impress partners and rivals. But none of that made sense now. Money didn't buy time. Power didn't intimidate cancer cells. Prestige offered no company for the final months. Without realizing it, his steps took him to regions further from the economic center. The streets became narrower, the buildings shorter, the people simpler. Robert had never walked through these neighborhoods, always observing them through the tinted windows of an executive car when he needed to go to the airport or a factory on the outskirts. The reality hit him like a punch to the stomach. He was completely alone. He had no family to inform of the diagnosis. His parents had passed away years ago. He had never married or had children, dedicating himself entirely to business. The few romantic relationships he tried fell apart when the women realized they were competing with spreadsheets and board meetings. As for friends, Robert recognized with bitterness that he only had associates and business contacts. People who respected him for his financial power, who sought him out for investment proposals, who accepted his invitations to expensive dinners because they could result in business opportunities, but who would genuinely care about his departure. His phone rang. It was Margaret, his assistant of 15 years. "Mr. Thorne, the meeting with the Japanese investors is set for 3. Are you on your way?" Robert looked at his watch and realized he had been walking aimlessly for 2 hours. "Cancel the meeting. Margaret, cancel all appointments for this week." "But sir, these are important deal—" "Margaret," Robert interrupted with a firmness he didn't feel. "Cancel everything. I need to handle some personal matters." He hung up the phone and kept walking. The sun was beginning to set, tinging the clouds with orange hues. At some point, his steps led him to a more dilapidated area, where the streets had more potholes, the walls more graffiti, and the people more tired faces. That was when he heard the shouting. "Get out of here, you filthy brat! Go bother customers somewhere else!" Robert turned, his head toward the voices. 3 uniformed security guards surrounded a small figure leaning against the wall of a supermarket. It was a girl of about 8 years old, with dirty clothes and disheveled hair, holding a dented tin can. "I just wanted to ask for a little food, sir. I haven't eaten since yesterday." Her voice was thin, but she wasn't whining. There was a strange dignity in those words. "We already told you this isn't a place for beggars. Go find social services, or go back to the hole you crawled out of." One of the guards pushed her hard, causing the girl to stumble and fall to the ground on her knees. Something inside Robert snapped. Perhaps it was the accumulated anger of the last few months, perhaps the frustration of feeling helpless in the face of his own mortality, or perhaps it was simply the first opportunity in years to do something that actually mattered. He approached the guards with firm steps. "Leave the girl alone." The 3 men turned, sizing up the stranger in the expensive suit who had appeared out of nowhere. "Look, sir, we're just doing our job. This kid stays here all day bothering the customers. She's a hungry child. What's the problem with that?" Robert pulled his wallet from his inner jacket pocket, a gesture that did not go unnoticed by the guards. "The problem is that this is a commercial establishment, not a charity." The tallest guard crossed his arms, trying to show authority. Robert pulled out $500 bills and held them out to the man. "Now you're being paid to leave her alone. You can get back to work." The guards exchanged uncertain looks. $500 was more than any of them earned in a week. They took the money and walked away, muttering to each other and looking back with curiosity. Robert knelt beside the girl, who was still on the ground organizing a few belongings that had fallen from a torn bag. "Are you hurt?" She lifted her face to him. Robert was surprised by the child's eyes. They weren't the scared, pleading eyes he expected to find. There was intelligence there, and a disturbing serenity for someone so young. "I'm not hurt. I've been pushed worse than that." She stood up on her own, brushing the dust off her scraped knees. "Thank you for making them leave. What is your name?" "Abigail." She hesitated for a moment. "And yours, sir?" "Robert." He looked at the dented can she was holding. "You said you haven't eaten since yesterday?" Abigail nodded, but without drama or self-pity. It was a factual statement, like someone commenting on the weather. Sometimes it takes a little longer to get something, but something always shows up. Robert felt a pang in his chest. This girl, who couldn't have been more than 8, spoke about hunger with the casualness of someone discussing a weather forecast. "Do you want to eat something now? There's a diner on the corner." For the first time, Abigail's eyes brightened, but she studied him for a moment as if weighing his intentions. "You won't want anything weird in return, will you?" The question hit Robert like a blow. An 8-year-old child had already learned to distrust the kindness of adults. "No, Abigail, I just want you to eat." She nodded slowly. "Then I accept, but only if you eat too. You look sadder than I do." Robert blinked, surprised by the observation. How had a street girl managed to read his expression better than the doctors and executives he dealt with daily? "All right, let's have dinner together." As they walked to the small diner on the corner, Robert realized that, for the first time in months, he wasn't thinking about his own death. He was thinking about how an abandoned child had managed to maintain her dignity amidst despair, and wondering what else she could teach him about resisting when everything seemed lost. The diner was small and simple, with formica tables and plastic chairs that had seen better days. Robert felt out of place in his $3,000 suit, but Abigail seemed completely at ease as she studied the laminated menu with the concentration of someone making important choices. "Can I order whatever I want?" she asked, looking at him with a mix of hope and suspicion. "You can order everything you want." Robert gestured to the waiter, a young man in his 20s who watched them with ill-disguised curiosity. Abigail ordered a full plate: rice, beans, steak, fries, salad, and a side of cornbread. Robert ordered only a sandwich, but when he saw the girl's eyes light up at the sight of the food, he also ordered an extra portion of chicken and 2 slices of chocolate cake. "Aren't you going to eat?" Abigail asked, noticing that Robert only picked at his sandwich while she devoured her plate politely, but without hiding her hunger. "I haven't had much of an appetite lately." Robert pushed the food around his plate, his stomach churned by the combination of medication and anxiety that had become his routine. Abigail stopped eating and studied him with those intelligent eyes that seemed to see much more than they should. "Are you sick, sir?" The direct question caught him off guard. Robert was used to beating around the bush, to people who danced around delicate subjects. "Why do you ask that?" "My grandma got like that before." Abigail hesitated, then continued with the same naturalness she used to talk about hunger. "Before she passed, she stopped eating, got very thin, and always had that face like she was hurting on the inside." Robert felt a tightness in his chest. An 8-year-old child had managed to diagnose in minutes what he had been trying to hide from everyone for months. "Did your grandmother live with you?" "She raised me since I was born. My mom had problems during birth and—" Abigail shrugged as if telling someone else's story. "Grandma said my mom became a star in the sky to watch over me from afar. I never knew my dad. Grandma said he wasn't ready to be a daddy." Robert chewed slowly, processing how this girl spoke of tragedies with a serenity he couldn't find regarding his own problems. "And what happened to your grandmother?" "She got sick. It started with a cough that wouldn't go away, then the shortness of breath came. I took her to the clinic many times, but there were always too many people in line, and when our turn came, the doctor looked quickly and sent us home with cough medicine." Abigail stopped eating for a moment, her eyes lost in memory. "When she got really bad, I called the ambulance, but by then it was too late." Robert felt his throat tighten. "I'm so sorry, Abigail." "Grandma always said people get sick when they've been very sad for a long time, that the body gets tired of fighting alone." Abigail went back to eating, but kept her eyes fixed on Robert. "Have you been sad for a long time?" The simple question hit him like a revelation. Robert had never thought of his own illness that way. He had always viewed it as a technical problem to be solved with the right strategy and resources. But when Abigail asked about sadness, he remembered the sleepless nights of the last few years, the constant sense of emptiness even at the height of professional success, the loneliness that filled his weekends in luxury apartments. "I think so," he admitted, surprised by his own honesty. "I didn't even know I was sad until you asked." Abigail finished the last piece of steak and focused on the chocolate cake. "My grandma said sadness is like a sickness we catch inside, but it can be cured with affection and company. She always got a little better whenever I stayed by her side, telling stories or brushing her hair." Robert watched the girl savor the cake with her eyes closed, as if memorizing every flavor. "Where have you been sleeping since your grandmother passed?" "In different places. Sometimes under the overpass when it's cold, sometimes at the Port Authority bus terminal when it rains. There's a lady who works at the bakery who lets me stay outside when it's slow." Abigail licked her fork so as not to waste a single bit of chocolate. "What about you? Do you live alone?" "I do." Robert realized how heavy the words sounded when spoken aloud. "I have a large apartment, but you're sad there alone," Abigail completed, as if it were obvious. Robert nodded, impressed by the child's ability to read between the lines. "Abigail, can I ask you something? How do you manage to stay so strong after everything you've been through?" She thought for a moment, chewing the last bit of cake. "My grandma always said we can choose to be angry at the world, or try to understand why bad things happen. She said when we get too angry, the sadness grows inside and makes us even sicker." Abigail wiped her mouth with a paper napkin. So I chose to try to understand. And then I realized that many people suffer because they are alone, just like you. Robert felt his eyes sting. When was the last time someone had spoken to him so directly and honestly? When was the last time someone genuinely cared about his well-being without wanting something in return? Abigail, I need to tell you something. Robert took a deep breath, preparing to say the words he had avoided saying out loud. I'm sick, very sick. The doctors said... He stopped, unable to complete the sentence. That you're going to leave, like my grandma? Abigail asked with the same serenity she had used to order dinner. Robert nodded, feeling a tear run down his face. It was the first time he had cried since the diagnosis. Abigail reached out her small hand and touched his on the table. Are you crying because you're afraid, or because you're alone? Both, Robert admitted, surprised by his own vulnerability. My grandma said when her time came, she wouldn't be afraid if I was there, that having someone nearby makes us braver. Abigail squeezed his hand. Do you have anyone? Robert shook his head no. Then we could take care of each other, Abigail suggested, with the naturalness of someone proposing a game. I don't have a home, you don't have company. My grandma always said that when two lost people find each other, they can help each other find the way. Robert looked at this dirty, thin girl who had nothing but the clothes on her back, and wondered how she could offer hope to someone who possessed millions in banks across the world. Abigail, do you understand that I could leave at any moment? Robert tried to choose words an 8-year-old could understand regarding the gravity of the situation. I understand. But while you're here, we could try to make it stop hurting inside. Abigail smiled for the first time since he met her. My grandma said sometimes a person gets better when they have a reason to stay. Have you ever tried having a reason? Robert fell silent, processing the girl's words. He had spent fortunes on experimental treatments, but he had never considered that perhaps he was attacking the wrong symptom. What if the problem wasn't just biological? Abigail, if I took you to live with me, would you like that? The question came out before he could reflect on the implications. The girl's eyes brightened but soon filled with suspicion. For real, not just out of pity? It's not pity, it's necessity. Robert realized he was telling the truth. I think I need you as much as you need me. Abigail studied him for a long moment, as if evaluating the sincerity of his words. Then she nodded slowly. I can try, but if you change your mind... I won't change my mind, Robert interrupted with a firmness he hadn't felt in months. They left the diner together, Robert carrying the torn bag with Abigail's few belongings. While they waited for the taxi Robert had called, the girl took his hand. Mr. Robert, can I ask you one more thing? Of course. Have you ever tried talking to the sickness? Asking it to go away? Robert frowned, confused. What do you mean? My grandma did that. She would put her hand on her chest and talk to the bad cells, telling them to leave her body. Sometimes it worked for a while. Abigail looked at him seriously. We could try. What's the worst that could happen? When the taxi arrived and Robert gave his address on the Upper West Side, the driver looked through the rearview mirror with ill-disguised surprise. A well-dressed executive accompanied by a street girl was certainly an unusual combination in the city. But Robert didn't care about the driver's look. For the first time in months, he felt something other than hopelessness running through his veins. He didn't know if it was hope, purpose, or simply the strange feeling of no longer being completely alone. As the taxi cut through the New York night traffic, Abigail fell asleep leaning against his arm, and Robert realized that the constant pain in his chest had diminished for the first time since the diagnosis. Perhaps this girl really knew something that the most expensive doctors in the world didn't. But when they reached Robert's building, the doorman blocked the entrance, looking at Abigail with obvious discomfort, and Robert realized his first obstacle would be convincing his own neighbors to accept his new reality. The doorman, Vincent, looked at Robert with an expression that mixed surprise and poorly hidden discomfort. His 20 years of working at the most exclusive building on the Upper West Side had never prepared him for a situation like this. "Good evening, Mr. Thorne," he greeted, but his eyes remained fixed on Abigail, who was partially hiding behind Robert. "Is the young lady staying long?" Robert felt the tension in the air. The Italian marble lobby and crystal chandeliers suddenly seemed cold and hostile. "Abigail is going to live with me, Vincent. She is my daughter." The words came out with more firmness than Robert expected. Vincent blinked several times as if trying to process contradictory information. "Your daughter, sir? But you always said you didn't have family." "Circumstances have changed." Robert placed a protective hand on Abigail's shoulder. "I need you to prepare an additional key for her and add her name to the resident list." Vincent hesitated, looking nervously at the security cameras. "Sir, I'm going to need documents. The board requires specific procedures for new residents. And there's the matter of the association vote." Robert felt his irritation grow. "Vincent, this is my residence. I pay enough in HOA fees to support 3 families. I don't need anyone's permission to decide who lives with me." "I understand, sir, but there are rules." Vincent lowered his voice as if sharing an embarrassing secret. "Some residents have already complained about different people circulating through the building. You know how things are." Abigail squeezed Robert's hand. Even as a child, she perfectly understood the subtext of the conversation. Robert felt a rage he hadn't experienced in years. "Vincent, this girl is my responsibility. If anyone has a problem with it, they can speak to me personally." Robert stepped closer to the front desk. "And I want this to be very clear. Any disrespect shown to her will be treated as disrespect shown to me." The doorman nodded quickly, but Robert realized the situation was far from resolved. They went up to the 30th floor in silence. In the mirrored elevator, Robert observed the contrast between his expensive suit and Abigail's simple appearance, and wondered how he hadn't foreseen these complications. The 3,000-square-foot apartment welcomed Abigail with a silence that was almost religious. She walked slowly through the living room, carefully touching the designer furniture, observing the panoramic view of the city through the floor-to-ceiling windows. "It's very beautiful," she said in a low voice, almost a whisper. "But it feels like nobody actually lives here." Robert looked around through her eyes. The apartment really looked like a showroom. Perfect furniture that nobody used, expensive decorative objects with no emotional meaning, cutting-edge technology that served only to impress rare visitors. "You're right. I never thought about that." Robert opened the door to the guest room. "This will be your room. Tomorrow we'll buy furniture that's more suitable for a girl." Abigail entered the room and sat on the edge of the king-size bed, her feet dangling without touching the floor. "Can I take a bath?" "Of course. There are clean towels in the closet and—" Robert stopped, realizing she had no clothes to change into. "Tomorrow we'll buy clothes too. For tonight, I can lend you one of my t-shirts." While Abigail bathed, Robert sat in the living room trying to assimilate the drastic changes of the last few hours. In the morning, he had received a death sentence. By nightfall, he was taking responsibility for a child he barely knew. The phone rang. It was Margaret, his assistant. "Mr. Thorne, sorry to call so late, but I've received some strange calls. It seems someone posted on social media that you were seen having dinner with a homeless girl. Journalists are asking if it's true." Robert felt his stomach tighten. "What do you mean they posted it?" "Apparently someone filmed you at the diner. The video is circulating with speculation about your motives." Margaret hesitated. "Sir, are you all right? Isn't this a bit impulsive?" Robert hung up the phone without answering. He opened his laptop and found the video easily. The grainy cell phone footage showed him and Abigail eating, with speculative captions about eccentric billionaires and their whims. The comments ranged from criticisms of an unequal society to conspiracy theories about his intentions. Abigail appeared in the living room wearing one of his Egyptian cotton t-shirts, which looked like a dress on her. Her wet hair was combed back, revealing a face that, once clean, showed delicate and intelligent features. "Did something bad happen?" she asked, noticing his worried expression. Robert closed the laptop. "Nothing we can't handle." Abigail sat on the sofa beside him. "Can I tell you a secret my grandma taught me?" Robert nodded. "When people are afraid of change, they make up bad stories about those who are changing. My grandma said it's normal. Abigail settled better on the sofa. The important thing is for us to know the truth about ourselves. Once again, Robert was impressed by the girl's wisdom. Abigail, aren't you afraid to live here? It's very different from what you're used to. A little, she admitted. But not of living here. I'm afraid of you changing your mind when you find out I sometimes talk too much, or that I have nightmares, or that I don't know how to use some of the stuff in a rich person's house. Robert felt his heart ache. Abigail, look at me. He waited for her to look up. I'm not going to change my mind. And you can talk as much as you want, have all the nightmares you need to have, and I'll teach you how to use anything. A small smile appeared on the girl's face. And I'm going to teach you what my grandma taught me about talking to the sickness. All right, but first you need to sleep. Tomorrow will be a long day. Robert tucked Abigail into the guest bed, a gesture he was performing, for the first time in his life. As he was leaving, she called him, Mr. Robert, can I call you Daddy Robert? The question hit him like a lightning bolt. Robert felt his eyes sting again. You can call me whatever you want, Abigail. Then good night, Daddy Robert. Good night, sweetheart. Robert left the room and leaned against the hallway wall, trying to control his emotions. One simple word had moved him more deeply than any medical diagnosis. A few hours later, Robert was awakened by a scream. He ran to Abigail's room and found her sitting up in bed, sweating and shaking. It was just a nightmare, she said, trying to calm herself down. Robert sat on the edge of the bed. Do you want to tell me about it? I dreamed I was alone again, that I woke up and you had gone away, like everyone else goes away. Tears streamed down her face. Robert pulled her into a hug, feeling how small and fragile she was in his arms. I'm not going away, Abigail. I promise. But you said you were very sick. Robert realized the painful contradiction of his promise. How could he guarantee he would stay? When the doctors had given him 6 months, Abigail, I'm going to fight as hard as I can to stay, and as long as I'm here, you will never be alone. She gradually calmed down in his arms. Daddy Robert, can I sleep here with you tonight? Just tonight? Robert hesitated for a moment, then nodded. They settled into the king-size bed in his room, Abigail curled up beside him like a frightened cub. Daddy Robert, she whispered in the dark. Are you feeling any different since you found me? Robert paused to analyze. The constant pain in his chest had diminished. His breathing felt less labored, and for the first time in months he had eaten a little without nausea. I think so, he admitted, surprised by the realization. My grandma always said that love is the strongest medicine there is. Maybe we're healing each other. The next morning, Robert was awakened by the intercom. Abigail was still sleeping soundly beside him. Vincent informed him that 2 men from Child Protective Services were in the lobby, wanting to speak with him about an anonymous report of an irregularity involving a minor. Robert felt his blood run cold. Someone had turned his decision to help Abigail into a legal problem that could separate them before they even had a chance to become a real family. He looked at the girl sleeping peacefully and realized that the fight ahead would be much larger than he had imagined. Robert went down to the lobby with his heart racing, leaving Abigail sleeping in his room. 2 middle-aged men waited in the lobby, wearing simple business attire and carrying clipboards. Their expressions were professional, but there was a rigidity that did not promise a friendly conversation. Mr. Robert Thorne, the taller of the 2, approached. I'm Mark Sanders, a caseworker from Child Protective Services. This is my colleague, Fred Oliver. We received an anonymous report about a minor who is allegedly in an irregular situation at this address. Robert took a deep breath, trying to control his nervousness. What kind of report? Possible kidnapping or the solicitation of a child in a street situation. Mark consulted his clipboard. We have information that you removed a girl from the street last night without following proper legal procedures. Procedures? Robert felt his anger rising. A child was being assaulted by security guards. I helped her. We understand your intention, Mr. Thorne, but there are protocols for these situations. Children in social vulnerability must be referred to specialized shelters, not taken to private residences. Fred spoke for the first time, his voice heavy with authority. We need to verify the miner's conditions and assess if she is safe. Robert felt as if he were being treated like a criminal. Abigail is perfectly safe. She has food, shelter, affection. Abigail? Mark noted the name. Do you know her last name? Do you have documents? Do you know if there is family looking for her? She told me she has no one. Her grandmother passed away recently and Robert realized how limited his information about Abigail was. Yesterday we didn't have time to discuss administrative details. The two caseworkers exchanged significant looks. Mr. Thorne, we're going to need to talk to the girl, and we'll also need to evaluate the housing conditions and your motivations for this decision. Robert led them to his apartment, feeling invaded and judged. In the elevator, Fred broke the silence. Do you have experience with children? Are you married? Do you have kids? I don't have a family of my own, but that doesn't mean I can't take care of Abigail. Robert clenched his fists inside his pockets. She needed help and I was in a position to offer it. Single men who suddenly take an interest in vulnerable children raise red flags in our line of work, Mark explained with professional coldness. We need to ensure there are no inappropriate motivations. The insinuation hit Robert like a slap. Are you suggesting that... We aren't suggesting anything. We're investigating, which is our duty, Fred interrupted. If your intentions are genuine, you won't have trouble cooperating. When they arrived at the apartment, they found Abigail, awake, sitting in the living room wearing Robert's t-shirt, watching the city view from the window. She turned upon hearing them enter, and Robert saw the instant fear in her eyes at the sight of the two strangers. Abigail, these gentlemen are from CPS. They just want to talk to you, Robert tried to sound reassuring. Abigail shrank into the sofa, her eyes moving quickly between Robert and the two men. Did I do something wrong? No, honey. We just want to make sure you're okay. Mark approached with a professional smile that didn't reach his eyes. Can you tell me your full name? Abigail Smith. Her voice came out in a whisper. And where were you living before you came here? Abigail looked at Robert as if asking permission to answer. With my grandma, Connie, but she got sick and... The girl's voice failed. Robert sat beside her on the sofa, and she immediately moved closer to him, seeking protection. Abigail, did Mr. Thorne hurt you in any way? Did he say anything strange to you? Did he ask you to do anything you didn't want to do? Fred crouched down to be at her level, but his proximity only increased the girl's nervousness. No, Abigail replied firmly, surprising everyone. Daddy Robert saved me from those mean men and gave me food. He's good. Daddy Robert? Mark noted the information with interest. Did he ask you to call him Daddy? No, I asked if I could. He said I could call him whatever I wanted. Abigail looked at Robert with genuine affection. He's not like the others. He doesn't want anything bad from me. The caseworkers spent 40 minutes asking questions, inspecting the apartment, and observing the interaction between Robert and Abigail. Robert felt like a specimen under analysis, every gesture being interpreted and judged. Mr. Thorne, Mark finally said, your housing conditions are adequate, and the girl shows no signs of abuse or coercion. However, the situation is still irregular. You can't simply decide to take care of a child without following legal procedures. What are those procedures? Robert asked, fearing the answer. First, Abigail needs to be registered in our system and undergo medical and psychological evaluations. Second, you need to sign up for the foster care program and go through an evaluation period. Third, if all goes well, you can begin the adoption process. And in the meantime, Robert felt panic rising. Does she go back to the street? She will stay in a temporary shelter until... No, Abigail screamed, grabbing Robert's arm. I don't want to go to a shelter. They don't take care of kids right. I want to stay with Daddy Robert. Fred sighed. Kid, we know it's hard, but there are rules for your protection. Protection? Abigail stood up, her eyes flashing with anger. You want to protect me by separating me from the only person who cared about me. Where were you when I was sleeping on the street? Where were you when I was hungry? Robert was impressed by the girl's courage. Even small and scared, she was fighting for them. Abigail is right, Robert said, finding his own courage. Are you going to separate a child who has finally found stability just to put her into a system that has already abandoned her before? Mark consulted his documents. There is an alternative. We can grant emergency temporary custody, provided you commit to immediately starting all necessary legal procedures. Robert nodded quickly. I'll do whatever it takes. But there are conditions. Abigail will need to start school immediately, undergo psychological and medical monitoring, and receive regular visits from our team. Any irregularity will result in the immediate removal of the child. I accept all conditions, Robert said without hesitation. 2 hours later, when the caseworkers finally left, leaving a pile of forms and a list of demands, Robert sat in the living room exhausted. Abigail snuggled beside him. Daddy Robert, are they going to take me away? I won't let that happen, Robert promised, stroking her hair. We're going to do everything right so you can stay forever. Abigail smiled, but Robert noticed she still seemed worried. Daddy Robert, can I tell you something about your sickness? Robert nodded. Last night when you were sleeping, I put my hand on your chest and talked to the bad cells, just like my grandma taught me. Abigail looked at him seriously. They told me they're confused. They said they got bad because you were alone and sad for a long time. But now they don't know if they should stay bad or get better. Robert felt a shiver. And what did you tell them? I told them that now you have a reason to stay well. That you have a daughter too. Take care of. Abigail placed her hand on his chest again. They promised they would think about it. Robert laughed, touched by the girl's innocence and sincerity. But when she withdrew her hand, he realized he truly felt different. The constant pressure in his chest had diminished even further, and his breathing felt easier. The phone rang, interrupting the moment. It was Dr. Miller. Robert, I need to see you urgently. I received test results from last week, and there's something I can't explain. The doctor's voice sounded confused. Some tumor markers showed changes that, well, it's better we talk in person. Robert scheduled the appointment for the next day and hung up, feeling a mix of hope and terror. Changes in markers could mean improvement or dramatic worsening. Abigail was watching him closely. Was it good news or bad news? I don't know yet. Tomorrow we'll find out. That afternoon they went shopping. Robert had never chosen children's clothes, and Abigail had never been to a shopping mall. She held firmly to his hand, impressed by the colorful storefronts and the crowds of people. In the children's clothing store, the saleswomen looked curiously at them. Robert realized they were still an unusual pair, an elegant executive buying clothes for a girl who clearly wasn't his biological daughter. Is she your... a saleswoman asked delicately. She's my daughter, Robert replied firmly, noticing how the words sounded more and more natural. Abigail chose simple and colorful clothes, always asking about the prices and being shocked by the values. Daddy Robert, this shirt costs more than my grandma spent on food in a month. Robert felt a pang of guilt for the stark difference between their realities. Abigail, you don't need to worry about money. Now I want you to have everything you need. But it's not right to spend so much when there are people going hungry, she said, putting an expensive shirt back on the rack. The girl's moral wisdom impressed him again. Robert made an impulsive decision. Abigail, how about we buy clothes for other children too, for those who are still in the situation you were in? Abigail's eyes brightened. Can we do that? They spent the rest of the afternoon buying clothes, shoes, and toys to distribute to children's shelters. Robert felt more useful and fulfilled than in years of closing million-dollar contracts. When they returned, home at dusk, laden with bags, Robert realized he had spent the entire day without thinking about his illness. For the first time in months, he was focused on something bigger than his own mortality. But when they reached the building, Vincent intercepted them with a grave expression. Mr. Thorne, I need to talk to you. Some residents have called an emergency meeting for tomorrow night. He lowered his voice. It's about the girl. They want to vote on prohibiting people in irregular situations in the building. Robert felt anger explode in his chest, but before he could respond, Abigail squeezed his hand. It's okay, Daddy Robert. We'll show them that I'm not dangerous. Looking at that brave girl who faced every obstacle with dignity, Robert realized the true fight was just beginning. and that perhaps his own healing depended on protecting hers. The next morning, Robert woke up before his alarm, anxious for the appointment with Dr. Miller. Abigail was still sleeping soundly beside him, and he took the opportunity to observe her serene little face. In the last 3 days, she had become the center of his existence in a way he had never imagined possible. As he got up, Robert noticed something different. The constant pain in his chest, which had accompanied him for months, was almost imperceptible. His breathing flowed with an ease he hadn't experienced since the diagnosis. Was it possible Abigail was right about talking to the sickness? "Daddy Robert," Abigail opened her eyes slowly. "Are you better today?" "I think so." Robert sat on the edge of the bed. "How do you know? Your face isn't grey anymore, and you aren't breathing like it hurts." Abigail stretched. "The bad cells are listening." Robert smiled, touched by the girl's absolute confidence. "Today we're going to the doctor to find out what's happening. Do you want to come with me?" Abigail's eyes brightened. "Can I really? I've never been to a private doctor." In Dr. Miller's office, Abigail held Robert's hand firmly, while the doctor analyzed exams spread across the desk with an expression of total perplexity. "Robert, in 30 years of oncology, I've never seen anything like this." Dr. Miller pointed to the images. "Your tumor markers have plummeted 70% in a week. The primary tumors have shrunk significantly, and there are signs that your own body is attacking the cancer cells." Robert felt his heart race. "Is that good or bad?" "It's extraordinary. Medically speaking, it should be impossible." The doctor looked at Abigail, who was watching everything with interest. "Did anything change in your routine? Different medication, diet, stress?" Robert looked at Abigail. "I adopted a daughter." Dr. Miller frowned. "What do you mean?" "This is Abigail. 3 days ago she entered my life and—" Robert hesitated, not knowing how to explain. "She's taught me some things about healing that you don't learn in medical school." The doctor seemed skeptical. "Robert, emotional changes can have an impact on the immune system, but not of this magnitude and speed." Abigail let go of Robert's hand and approached the doctor's desk. "Doctor, can I see the tests?" Dr. Miller smiled condescendingly. "Sweetheart, these are complex medical images." "My grandma taught me how to read people's bodies," Abigail interrupted seriously. "Can I try?" Robert nodded encouragingly. Abigail studied the images for a few minutes, running her small finger over the dark areas in the old scans. "Daddy Robert was very sad in here." She pointed to the chest region in the old images. "The cells got confused because there was no love for them, to remember how to be good." Dr. Miller looked at Robert with growing surprise. "How does she know how to locate—" "But now there is love," Abigail continued, pointing to the recent scans. "Look how the bad cells are shrinking. They're remembering how to be good cells again." The doctor was silent for a long moment, studying the images with new eyes. "It's an interesting interpretation." "Doctor," Robert leaned forward, "what does this mean for the prognosis?" "Honestly, I don't know. If this trend continues, we'll be talking about complete remission in a matter of months." Dr. Miller took off his glasses and cleaned them nervously. "But I need to warn you that spontaneous remissions can be temporary. I don't want to create unrealistic expectations." Abigail touched the doctor's arm. "Doctor, have you ever seen someone get well because they found a reason to live?" The simple question left Dr. Miller disconcerted. "Theoretically, emotional states can influence the immune response, but—" "So Daddy Robert can get completely well?" Abigail asked, with the confidence of someone who doesn't accept half answers. "It's possible," the doctor admitted reluctantly. "We'll repeat the tests in 2 weeks and evaluate the progress." Leaving the office, Robert felt as if he had been given a new chance at life. Abigail skipped beside him, radiant with the news. "I told you the cells would listen," she exclaimed in the elevator. "My grandma always said that love is the strongest medicine." Robert picked her up and spun her around, both laughing as if they had been father and daughter for years. "Abigail, you saved my life." "And you saved mine," she replied, hugging him tight. "Now we're a real family." But the happiness was interrupted when they reached the building. Vincent was waiting for them with a grave expression, accompanied by 2 men in suits whom Robert recognized as lawyers. Mr. Thorne, these gentlemen are representatives of the board and the building management, Vincent explained nervously. They need to talk to you about the meeting tonight. The taller of the lawyers approached. Mr. Thorne, I'm Arthur Merritt, legal counsel for the association. We need to discuss the irregular situation of the minor in question. Robert felt Abigail shrink beside him. What irregular situation? Abigail is my daughter. Not officially yet, Arthur consulted his documents, and some residents have raised legitimate concerns about security and the suitability of the environment. What kind of concerns? Robert asked, trying to control his irritation. Well, this is a high-end residential building. The residents invested here expecting a specific environment. The second lawyer, who introduced himself as Charles Silver, spoke with studied diplomacy. The presence of individuals of uncertain origin can affect property values. Robert felt his blood boil. Are you talking about my daughter as if she were a property value problem? It's not personal, Mr. Thorne. It's a matter of suitability for the socio-economic profile of the development. Arthur maintained his professional tone. There are other buildings more suitable for this type of family arrangement. Abigail pulled on Robert's shirt. Daddy Robert, are they saying I can't live here because I'm poor? The innocent question echoed through the silent lobby. Robert saw Vincent look away, embarrassed. Abigail, you can live anywhere I live, Robert declared loudly enough for everyone to hear. And anyone who has a problem with that can talk directly to me. Arthur sighed. Mr. Thorne, the meeting is scheduled for 8 o'clock. We recommend you attend to defend your position. Some residents have already signed a petition requesting your relocation or the removal of the child. After the lawyers left, Robert knelt beside Abigail in the elevator. Are you okay? I'm sad, she admitted. Those men looked at me like I was dirty, even after my bath. Robert felt his heart break. Abigail, listen well. It doesn't matter what these people say or think. You are my daughter, and nothing in the world will change that. But what if they kick us out of here? Then we'll find another place to live. A home can be anywhere, as long as we have each other. Abigail smiled weakly, but Robert noticed her confidence had been shaken. That afternoon they spent time organizing Abigail's room and playing with the new toys. Robert tried to keep her distracted, but he noticed she was quieter than usual. Daddy Robert, she said, while arranging a doll on the shelf. If I hadn't come to live here, you wouldn't be having these problems. Abigail, look at me. Robert sat on the floor beside her. The problems I'm having are from small-minded people, but you've brought only good things to my life. You made me want to live again. But those men said I don't belong here. Those men are wrong, and tonight I'm going to show them just how wrong they are. At 8 o'clock, Robert went down to the building's community room where a crowd of neighbors he barely knew had gathered to decide the fate of his newly formed family. Abigail stayed in the apartment with a nanny Robert had hired for the occasion. The room was full, with about 40 residents sitting in a circle. Robert recognized a few faces from the elevators, but he had never spoken to most of them beyond polite greetings. Arthur conducted the meeting with professional efficiency. We are here to discuss the situation of Unit 3001, where Mr. Robert Thorne has begun housing a minor of unknown origin, without following the building's security protocols. A grey-haired woman stood up. I've lived in this building for 15 years. It has always been a safe, family environment. We cannot allow it to become a shelter for anyone off the street. Murmurs of agreement echoed through the room. Robert felt surrounded by hostility, disguised as civilized concern. A middle-aged man crossed his arms. Nothing against charity, but there are appropriate organizations for that. We cannot turn our home into a social experiment. Robert stood up, feeling all eyes turn toward him. Ladies and gentlemen, Abigail is my daughter. She is not an experiment. She is not temporary charity. She is family. A daughter you found on the street 4 days ago? The grey-haired woman retorted. That's not fatherhood. That's dangerous impulsivity. Dangerous for whom? Robert asked, his voice gaining strength. For an 8-year-old girl who has never hurt anyone? Or dangerous for your prejudices? An uncomfortable murmur ran through the room. Arthur tried to regain control. Mr. Thorne, the issue is not prejudice, it's suitability. This building has specific standards. Standards that exclude orphaned children? Robert interrupted. Standards that prioritize apartment values over human life. A young female voice rose from the back of the room. I'd like to say something. Everyone turned to see a woman in her 30s whom Robert didn't recognize. She stood up gracefully. I'm Miranda Anderson. I live on the 15th floor. I'm a child psychologist and I've worked with adoption for 10 years. Her voice was calm but firm. What I'm hearing here tonight is exactly the kind of discrimination that keeps thousands of children in vulnerable situations. The room went silent. Miranda continued, You are discussing this as if this girl were a threat, when in fact she is a child who found someone willing to care for her. That should be celebrated, not fought. Robert felt a wave of gratitude for that unexpected defense. But he knew the battle was far from over, especially when he saw the hostile expressions that still dominated the room. The true fight for his new family was just beginning. Miranda Anderson remained standing, her gaze sweeping the room with professional authority. As a psychologist specializing in adoption, I need to clear up some dangerous misconceptions being perpetuated here. Arthur tried to regain control. Ms. Anderson, we appreciate your opinion, but this meeting is about specific association matters, which involve the well-being of a child, Miranda interrupted him firmly, which makes this discussion within my professional and moral competence. She addressed the crowd. Did you know that there are thousands of children waiting for adoption, and that most will never find a family because people like you create artificial barriers based on class prejudice? A blonde woman stood up indignantly. Nobody here is against adoption, but there are procedures, investigations, which Mr. Thorne is following, Miranda countered. I checked with CPS today. He has temporary custody and has initiated all necessary legal processes. She looked directly at Robert. What you are questioning is not legality. It's the social acceptance of a poor child. An uncomfortable murmur ran through the room. Robert felt a mix of gratitude and surprise at this unexpected defense. The middle-aged man who had spoken earlier stood up again. Doctor, with all due respect, our concern is legitimate. This is a controlled environment where we know the families. Know them? Miranda laughed bitterly. How many of you knew that Mr. Thorne was facing a terminal illness alone? How many offered support, or even asked how he was doing? Robert felt every gaze turned toward him. He hadn't told anyone about the cancer, maintaining a facade of normalcy even in the darkest moments. Mr. Thorne is sick? The grey-haired woman asked, her hostility giving way to morbid curiosity. Robert took a deep breath. It was time to stop hiding. I've been in treatment for advanced cancer for 2 years. Until I found Abigail, the doctors had given me 6 months to live. The silence in the room was absolute. Robert continued, his voice gaining strength. Do you want to know why I adopted a street child? Because she saved me. Literally. My test results have improved dramatically since she entered my life. Arthur coughed nervously. Mr. Thorne, personal health issues do not change the association's concerns. They don't change them? A child's voice echoed from the community room door. Everyone turned to see Abigail entering, still in her pajamas and with eyes red from crying. Daddy Robert was dying alone and nobody cared? Robert stood up, alarmed. Abigail, what are you doing here? Where is Carrie? Carrie was the nanny he had hired. She fell asleep on the sofa. I heard the shouting and came to see if you were okay. Abigail walked directly to Robert, ignoring the curious stares of the adults. Why are these people shouting at you? The child's presence completely changed the atmosphere. It was one thing to discuss a minor of unknown origin in abstract terms. It was quite another to look at a real child, small and vulnerable. Miranda approached and knelt at Abigail's level. Hello, sweetheart. I'm Miranda. Some people are worried because you're new here, but it's nothing we can't handle. Abigail studied Miranda for a moment, then nodded. You have kind eyes, just like my grandma had. The simplicity of the observation visibly moved Miranda. She looked at the room. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to look at this child. At 8 years old, she lost all her family and survived on the streets of New York. That requires extraordinary strength and intelligence. Abigail approached the table where Arthur had spread out documents. Can I see what you're discussing about me? Arthur hesitated, then pushed some papers toward her. These are complex administrative matters, child. Abigail studied the documents with surprising concentration for her age. This paper says I'm a potential security risk. What kind of risk am I? The direct question left Arthur visibly uncomfortable. Well, it's not personal. These are standard protocols. Protocols against orphaned children? Abigail asked, her voice small but firm. Am I dangerous because I don't have parents? A young woman in the back of the room stood up, visibly emotional. I'd like to say something. Her voice trembled slightly. My name is Amy Ferris. I live on the 20th floor. I am also an adopted child. Robert felt a shift in the energy of the room. Amy continued. My adoptive parents were wealthy, respected. They had all the papers in order, but for years they treated me like a philanthropic trophy. She looked at Abigail. This girl has something I never had. Someone who chose her out of love, not out of social obligation. The revelation generated uncomfortable murmurs. Amy proceeded. You are judging a situation based on prejudices I know well. The difference isn't in the child's origin, but in the sincerity of the love offered. Abigail approached Amy. Were you happy with your adoptive parents? Amy hesitated, then knelt to be at the girl's level. No, sweetheart. They never let me forget that I was different, that I was a charity case. She looked at Robert. But I see in his eyes when he looks at you something I never saw in my adoptive parents' eyes. What? Abigail asked, curious. Genuine pride. Unconditional love. Amy smiled. He didn't choose you to feel good about himself. He chose you because he needed you as much as you needed him. Robert felt his eyes sting. Amy's observation had perfectly captured something he hadn't known how to express. Arthur consulted his watch, visibly uncomfortable with the direction of the meeting. Well, these are touching matters, but we still need to address the practical concerns of the residents. The blonde woman stood up again. Mr. Merritt is right. Regardless of the emotional aspects, there are security and suitability issues. What security issues? Abigail asked the woman directly. Do I hurt anyone? Do I steal? Do I scream in the hallways? The woman seemed disconcerted. No, sweetheart, but then why are you afraid of me? Abigail insisted, her voice heavy with a sadness that hit the hearts of everyone present. An elderly man who hadn't spoken the entire meeting stood up slowly. Robert recognized him as Mr. Albert, a resident of the 12th floor. Can I tell a story? Mr. Albert leaned on his cane. I'm 83 years old. My family fled Italy during the war with nothing but the clothes on our backs. The room fell into respectful silence. He continued. When we arrived in America, we faced exactly this kind of discrimination. We were the dirty, dangerous immigrants, unsuitable for respectable neighborhoods. Abigail approached him, fascinated. And what happened? Some good people gave us a chance, not out of charity, but because they recognized our humanity. Mr. Albert looked around the room. This girl reminds me of myself, at 8 years old. Scared but brave, different but not dangerous. Arthur tried to regain control once more. Mr. Albert, we respect your experience, but nothing, the old man interrupted with authority. You are doing exactly what they did to my family 70 years ago, creating fear where there should be compassion. Robert realized the tide was turning. The unexpected defenses from Miranda, Amy, and Mr. Albert had exposed the prejudices behind the legitimate concerns. But then Charles Silver, the second lawyer, stood up with a triumphant expression. Ladies and gentlemen, while we discuss emotional aspects, I have received a crucial legal update. Robert felt his stomach tighten. The lawyer's tone promised trouble. According to an investigation requested by some residents, the minor in question is not just an ordinary orphaned child. Charles consulted his phone. Abigail Smith has been sought by the authorities for 3 months. A shocked silence fell over the room. Robert felt the world spin. What do you mean, sought? There is an ongoing investigation into irregularities regarding the death of her grandmother, Connie Smith. The child disappeared before social workers could properly investigate the circumstances. Charles smiled with satisfaction. Technically, Mr. Thorne, you may be harboring a fugitive. Robert looked at Abigail, who had turned completely pale. Abigail, what is he talking about? I didn't know. Abigail began to cry. When Grandma died, some men came and said they were going to take me to a place far away. I was scared, and I ran. Charles continued relentlessly. The fact is, there is a pending legal process. Until it is resolved, her presence here exposes the association to legal complications. Robert knelt beside Abigail, who was shaking with fear. I won't let anyone separate you from me. It doesn't matter what happened before. But when he looked around the room, he saw that the revelations had changed the atmosphere again. The faces that were beginning to soften returned to suspicion and fear. Miranda approached him. Robert, we need to talk, now. As he led Abigail out of the room, Robert heard Arthur announce that a vote would be held the following week regarding their stay in the building. Going up in the elevator with his daughter in tears in his arms, Robert realized that Abigail's past had just become a threat to the future they were trying to build together. Back in the apartment, Robert carried Abigail directly to her room, where the girl curled up in bed hugging her pillow. Carrie, the nanny, woke up startled on the sofa and apologized profusely for falling asleep. But Robert gently dismissed her, his mind focused only on Abigail. "Daddy Robert," she whispered between sobs, "I didn't want to lie. I was just afraid to tell you about the men who came to get me." Robert sat on the edge of the bed and stroked the girl's hair. "Abigail, tell me everything that happened when your grandmother passed away, from the beginning." Abigail took a deep breath, trying to control her crying. When Grandma got really bad, a neighbor called the ambulance, but it was too late. After she left, some social workers appeared the next day. And what did they say? That I was an orphaned minor and had to go to a special place until they found a family for me. Abigail shrank further. But the neighbor, Mrs. Mary Higgins, told me that place was far away, that the kids stayed in rooms with many others, that some never left there. Robert felt a tightness in his chest. "And then you ran away." "Mrs. Higgins helped me. She said when they came back the next day to get me, I shouldn't be there." Abigail looked at him with eyes full of fear. "Did I do wrong? Should I have gone with them?" "No, Abigail. You did what you thought was best to protect yourself." Robert hugged her. "But now we need to resolve this the right way." The phone rang, interrupting the moment. It was Miranda, the psychologist who had defended them at the meeting. "Robert, can I come up? I need to talk to you about Abigail's legal situation." Binti my nurse. Minutes later, Miranda was sitting in the living room with a folder of documents. Abigail remained glued to Robert's side, still visibly shaken. "Abigail, I researched your grandmother's case," Miranda began gently. "The investigation isn't about you doing anything wrong. It's about medical negligence. Your grandmother died of pneumonia that evolved into sepsis, a treatable condition if diagnosed in time." Robert frowned. "How does that affect Abigail?" "The district attorney is investigating the clinic where Grandma Connie was treated repeatedly without receiving proper care." Miranda showed some documents. "Abigail is an important witness, not a suspect. They wanted to hear from her about how many times she took her grandmother to the clinic and how they were treated." Abigail perked up slightly. "They only wanted to know about the doctor who always sent Grandma back home." "Exactly. And the fact that you ran away complicated the investigation, but it doesn't make you a criminal." Miranda addressed Robert. "The problem is that, technically, she has been in an irregular situation for 3 months. This could complicate your temporary custody." Robert felt despair grow. "What do I need to do?" "Tomorrow morning we'll go together to the DA's office to clear up the situation. With luck, Abigail will give her statement and that will resolve the legal issue." Miranda hesitated. "But there is a risk she will be temporarily placed in a shelter until the paperwork is completed." "No!" Abigail screamed, grabbing Robert's arm. "I don't want to go to a shelter. I want to stay with Daddy Robert." Robert pulled her into a protective hug. "I won't let that happen. Is there any way to ensure she stays with me during the process?" Miranda sighed. I'll try to argue that the current stability is better for her than another change of environment, but I can't guarantee anything. After Miranda left, Robert and Abigail stayed awake talking. The girl was restless, clearly haunted by the fear of being separated from him. "Daddy Robert, do you promise you won't give up on me even if it's hard?" "Abigail, listen well." Robert looked into her eyes. "It doesn't matter how many people show up, how many papers we need to sign, how many meetings we face. You are my daughter now, and I will fight for you until my last breath." The night was long and restless. Robert woke up several times checking if Abigail was okay, and he realized the chest pains had returned with intensity. The stress of the last few days was taking its physical toll. The next morning, they headed to the district attorney's office accompanied by Miranda. The imposing building intimidated Abigail, who clung firmly to Robert's hand as they crossed hallways filled with lawyers and paperwork. The prosecutor in charge of the case, Fiona Moore, was a woman in her 40s with a serious but not hostile expression. She received Abigail with kindness, offering water and cookies before starting the questions. "Abigail, I'm going to ask you some questions about your grandmother. There are no right or wrong answers. I just want to understand what happened, okay?" Abigail nodded, but remained close to Robert. For 2 hours, Abigail recounted in detail the visits to the clinic, always reporting how the doctor on duty minimized her grandmother's symptoms and prescribed only cough syrup. "How many times did you go to the clinic?" Fiona asked. 7 times in the last 2 months before Grandma got really bad," Abigail replied with surprising precision. "We always told the doctor she was getting worse, but he said it was just an old person's flu." Fiona took careful notes. "And when was your grandmother hospitalized?" "Only when she fainted and wouldn't wake up anymore. Then I called the ambulance myself." Abigail lowered her head. But it was too late. The hospital doctors said if she had gone before... Robert felt his heart tighten seeing Abigail carry this guilt. After the statement, Fiona spoke privately with Robert and Miranda. "Abigail's testimony is valuable. It confirms serious medical negligence. But her situation still needs to be regularized." "What does that mean?" Robert asked, fearing the answer. "Technically, she should have been placed in a shelter 3 months ago to wait for adoption through official channels. The fact that she is with you, even with temporary custody, breaks protocol." Miranda intervened. "Prosecutor, considering the child is clearly well adapted and happy, wouldn't it be more harmful to remove her now?" Fiona studied her documents. "It's a complex situation. The child's best interest must prevail, but there are procedures that must be followed." Robert felt panic rise. "Prosecutor Moore, Abigail saved my life, literally. I'm in treatment for terminal cancer and my health has improved dramatically since she arrived. Separating her from me could be fatal for both of us." The prosecutor looked at him with renewed interest. "What do you mean, fatal?" Robert explained about his medical condition and the extraordinary improvement of the last few days. "My doctors can't explain it, but the tests show significant tumor regression since Abigail entered my life." Fiona remained silent for a long moment. "I'll consult with the judge in charge of the case. There is precedent for keeping children in temporary homes when removal would cause greater harm than benefit." "How much time do we have?" Miranda asked. 3 days. By Friday, I'll have a definitive answer." Fiona looked at Robert seriously. "I recommend you prepare full medical documentation about your condition and the correlation with Abigail's arrival." Leaving the DA's office, Robert felt exhausted and apprehensive. 3 days to decide if he would lose the person who had given new meaning to his life. On the way back, Abigail remained quiet, clearly processing the gravity of the situation. "Daddy Robert, if they take me, will you get sick again?" Robert stopped the car at the first opportunity and turned to her. "Abigail, I'm not going to let that happen. And if by chance it does, I'm going to fight. Had to bring you back, I promise." But that afternoon, the situation became even more complicated. Vincent called informing him that journalists were at the building door, wanting to interview Robert about the businessman who adopted a fugitive child. The story had leaked, and now they faced not only legal and social pressures but public scrutiny. Robert looked at Abigail playing quietly in the living room and realized the fight for his family had become a multi-front battle. and he wasn't sure if he would have the strength to win all of them, especially with his health already beginning to falter, again under the relentless stress. When the phone rang again and Vincent informed him that 2 official cars had arrived at the building, Robert knew the 3-day deadline had just become much shorter. Robert ran to the window and saw 2 official cars parked in front of the building, but to his surprise they weren't CPS vehicles. One was from the district attorney's office and the other seemed to be from a health department. Journalists crowded around, taking photos and asking questions to the men in suits who stepped out of the vehicles. "Abigail, come here," Robert called her, trying to keep his voice calm. "I think we need to go down." But before they could leave, the intercom rang. It was Vincent, and his voice sounded strangely excited. "Mr. Thorne, Prosecutor Moore from the DA's office is coming up, but she said it's good news." Robert frowned, confused. Good news didn't usually come accompanied by official cars and journalists. Minutes later, Fiona Moore entered the apartment, accompanied by a man who introduced himself as Dr. Paul Mendelsohn, Director of Health Inspection, and a young woman carrying several folders. "Mr. Thorne, Abigail," Fiona began, a restrained smile on her face. "I have extraordinary news regarding the investigation into Grandma Connie's case." Robert and Abigail sat on the sofa, holding hands, waiting for what felt like a sentence. "Abigail, do you remember telling us that you always wrote down the names of the doctors who treated your grandmother?" Fiona asked. "Yes, Grandma taught me to always write down the name of who treated us, in case we needed to complain later," Abigail answered. "I kept the papers in a little box." "We managed to recover that box from the apartment where you lived. And do you know what we discovered, Doctor?" Mendelsohn leaned forward. "Your notes were the key to uncovering a corruption scheme that had been running for 3 years at the clinic." Robert blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" The young woman opened one of the folders. "I'm Clara Sands, a prosecutor specializing in public health crimes. Abigail's testimony led us to investigate Dr. Mark Rivers, who was being paid by a pharmaceutical lab to prescribe only specific medications, even when patients needed more complex treatments." Abigail's eyes widened. "The doctor who always gave only syrup to Grandma?" "Exactly. He received commissions for not referring patients to more expensive tests or specialized treatments." Clara showed documents. "Your meticulous notes on dates, symptoms, and prescriptions were fundamental to proving the pattern of negligence." Robert felt a mix of indignation and surprise. "How many people were affected?" "More than 200 families in the last 3 years. Several deaths could have been avoided, including Grandma Connie's." Dr. Mendelsohn seemed gravely satisfied. "Abigail, without knowing it, you collected evidence that allowed us to dismantle a corruption network." Fiona addressed Abigail directly. "Sweetheart, you aren't a fugitive. You're a hero. Your notes are going to help get justice for your grandmother and for many other families." Abigail looked at Robert, then back at the prosecutors. "Does that mean I won't be separated from Daddy Robert?" "More than that," Fiona smiled broadly. "Considering your courage in preserving important evidence and your crucial role in the investigation, the judge has authorized speeding up your adoption process. If Mr. Thorne agrees, the adoption can be finalized in 2 weeks." Robert felt tears in his eyes. "I agree. More than agree." Abigail jumped into his lap, laughing and crying at the same time. "For real, Daddy Robert? I'm going to be your official daughter?" "You're going to be my official daughter," Robert confirmed, his voice choked with emotion. But the surprises hadn't ended. Dr. Mendelsohn addressed Robert. "Mr. Thorne, we took the liberty of consulting your oncologist about your medical condition, especially after your statements yesterday." Robert tensed. "And?" "Dr. Miller sent us your most recent tests. The improvement in your condition is truly extraordinary." Dr. Mendelsohn consulted his documents. "So much so that we contacted the National Cancer Institute. They would like to study your case as part of research on the impact of psychological well-being on the recovery of oncology patients." Robert was speechless. "Study my case? Your case could help develop new treatment protocols that include emotional and family support as an integral part of therapy," Clara explained. "Obviously, only if you both agree." Abigail looked at Robert with pride. I told you talking to the cells worked. Everyone laughed, and Robert felt a lightness he hadn't experienced in years. The phone rang again. Vincent informed him that the situation at the entrance had changed completely. The journalists now wanted to interview the businessman and the hero girl who uncovered a medical corruption scheme. "We can handle the press for you," Fiona offered. "This is an important victory for justice, and your story can inspire other families." An hour later, when the prosecutors left, Robert and Abigail sat on the balcony, observing the city that had been the stage of so much suffering and that now represented a new beginning. "Daddy Robert," Abigail said, snuggled in his arms, "do you think my grandma is seeing all this?" "I'm sure she is, and she must be very proud of you." "And proud of us," Abigail corrected him, "because now we're a real family." The next day, Robert received an unexpected call from Arthur Merritt, the association lawyer. His voice sounded completely different from the meeting. "Mr. Thorne, I'm calling to apologize on behalf of the association. After yesterday's revelations, the residents have called a new meeting." Robert frowned. "What kind of meeting?" "A meeting to approve a motion of congratulations for you both, and to revoke any restriction on Abigail's stay." Arthur seemed genuinely embarrassed. "We would also like to contribute to a support fund for other children in similar situations." Robert almost laughed at the irony. "And what changed people's opinions?" "Well, discovering that Abigail is a hero who helped unmask medical corruption changed everyone's perspective. And seeing you recovering from terminal cancer, that touched many hearts." That afternoon, Robert and Abigail were surprised by an unexpected visit. Miranda, the psychologist who had defended them, arrived accompanied by Mr. Albert, the elderly Italian man, and Amy, the young woman who had told her own adoption story. "We've come to make a proposal," Miranda announced. "We want to create a support program for non-conventional adoptions, families that form out of mutual need like yours." Mr. Albert leaned forward. "Robert, your story reminded me that sometimes the best families are those that choose each other, not those that are born ready." Amy nodded. "And Abigail proved that children in vulnerability can be sources of strength, not just objects of charity." "What are you proposing?" Robert asked, intrigued. "An institute," Miranda explained, "aimed at connecting people who need a family with children who need a home, based on genuine emotional compatibility and mutual need, not just bureaucratic criteria." Abigail perked up. "Like a place where sad people can find lonely kids and they can heal each other." "Exactly," Amy smiled. "You described it perfectly." Robert reflected for a moment. His company had given him material wealth, but this new project could give him a wealth of purpose. "I can fund a project like that, and I can help take care of the other kids," Abigail offered immediately. "I can teach them how to talk to people's sadness." 3 months later, Robert was sitting in Dr. Miller's office receiving news that a year ago would have seemed impossible. "Robert, officially, you are in complete remission. There are no longer signs of cancer cells in your body." Dr. Miller smiled broadly. "It's the most extraordinary recovery case I've ever witnessed." "And will it stay that way?" Robert asked, still not completely believing it. "With proper monitoring and maintaining your current emotional state, I don't see why not. You have a wonderful daughter and a clear life purpose. That makes all the difference." Abigail, who was in the room drawing, looked up. "I told you, Daddy Robert. The cells just needed to remember how to be happy." 6 months later, the Connie Smith Institute, named in honor of Abigail's grandmother, opened its doors in a large, cozy house in Brooklyn Heights. The center connected adults seeking purpose with children needing a home, always based on genuine affinity and mutual need. Robert and Abigail cut the ribbon together, surrounded by Miranda, Mr. Albert, Amy, and dozens of other people who had been inspired by their story. "Daddy Robert," Abigail whispered as they watched the first families getting to know each other in the house's garden. "Do you think we did it?" Robert looked around, seeing lonely adults talking animatedly with orphaned children, seeing smiles appearing on faces that before carried only sadness. "We did more than I ever dreamed, sweetheart. We turned our pain into hope for others. And now we have a giant family," Abigail smiled, pointing to all the people around. "Just like you always deserved to have." Robert hugged his daughter, finally understanding that the true healing had not just been medical, but spiritual. Abigail hadn't just saved his life. She had taught him that genuine love truly could transform sick cells into healthy ones, broken hearts into whole ones, and deep loneliness into an abundant family. And as the sun set over New York City, Robert realized that his story with Abigail wasn't about a businessman saving a street girl, nor about a child healing a sick man. It was about two lost souls who found each other and discovered that together they could create miracles.